What's the scariest encounter you've had with a total stranger? First story. I was taking a shower in the bathroom of the walkout basement. My 3-year-old son was upstairs with my mother eating breakfast. I heard him open the door and told him, "Mommy is in the shower. You have to wait." The door did not close, but he did not respond either, so I asked him to go back upstairs and ask Grandma for whatever he needed. Instead, I see a shadow and outline of a hand touching the shower curtain and realize that there is an adult in the bathroom, not my son. I scream and punch through the shower curtain. I do not think I connected, but I heard the man run out anyway. As fast as I could, I jumped out and grabbed a towel to check on my son and mom. At the same time, my mom was coming downstairs to see if I was okay from the scream. The man never went upstairs, and they did not even know it had happened. The walkout basement door and window were open. I called the police, and they did not find him, just my empty wallet about a block away. They did come back to me a few weeks later to let me know that they caught a man in the area raping women at gunpoint, and they think it was the same man. I have never been so scared in my life. The most visceral part for me was knowing he was just standing quietly in the bathroom while I talked to him like he was my son. Honestly, I do not know why, but that creeps me out the most. It felt really violating at the time. Second story. I was about 10 years old getting back home from the park with my sister. She, being the stubborn younger, I need no older sister playing mom to me sibling, walked purposely 20 meters ahead so nobody would even think we were together. She rounds the corner and I hear a blood-curdling scream. I never covered 20 meters so fast in my life. I round the corner and there is a man holding my sister by her throat, dragging her into an open car parked nearby. When he sees me advancing and yelling incomprehensibly, I honestly do not know what I yelled. I was scared out of my wits. And he realizes there are two of us. He drops her, jumps into the car, and drives off. She had fingerprint-shaped bruises on her throat for days. Third story. About 10 years ago, I was taking my girlfriend at the time home around midnight on a very rural back road in North Georgia. I was half asleep at the wheel when this lady ran out from the woods in front of my truck screaming, "Help me!" I slammed on my brakes and rolled my window halfway down as I was realizing she was covered in blood and mud and sticks and was not right. She reached her hands into my cab and grabbed my neck as hard as she could. I took off just a little down the road and found a crowd of distraught people outside their house and figured it was probably related. They asked if I had seen anyone, and I told them she almost got run over. Well, she had been released from an asylum that day and had stabbed her mother. She showed me the wound on her shoulder. Later, I drove back by, and there were a dozen police cars lit up at the house. Creepy. Fourth story. At the age of 14 to 15, I was walking my dog in a forest. I ran into a large guy who told me he had failed to report back to his mental hospital, but I should not be afraid. He told me about visiting the purgatory and how painful that was, and said hell was specifically 1,000 times more painful. He gave me colorful details, like something out of Hieronymus Bosch or the Hindu Book of the Dead. He begged me to pray for him, which I said yes, of course, tomorrow. Incidentally, my school gym in those days was located on the opposite side of the road from a mental hospital, and they would release them for a walk every now and then. We would run into them on our way to the gym from school. It was a bit eerie, but okay since we were in a group, and it was in a city. Being outside of civilization and alone with that guy was terrifying. He was not harmful and let me go, but it was deeply uncomfortable. Fifth story. 15 years old on a school trip in London. A shady guy walked up next to me in the subway and was staring intently at me. He pushed his thigh against my leg, and I felt a little sting. Then I looked down and saw he was hiding a knife in his pocket. I just froze, and he stood there for another few seconds before he walked away, presumably to terrorize someone else. He must have been some methamphetamine user, but scared the living shit out of this pimply teenager. Sixth story. Guy down the street tried to lure my sister and I to his house while we were walking down the street. We started ignoring him. On the way back, he threatened us, and we went to my landlord's house to call the police. The guy got arrested shortly after, but was bailed out. His dad was a sex offender, and there had already been multiple complaints about him from other parents. I am glad my sister and I were smart enough not to engage with him and to get help right away. Seventh story. Not scary per se, but deeply disturbing. A random dude at my local library accosted me while I was enjoying a new science fiction novel and was absolutely convinced I was his son. He kept telling me he was sorry and he never meant to kill my mother, who he called Pink, and said some other heinous things I will not describe. Batshit crazy, but he sounded so rational and calm the whole time. Shit gave me the creeps for a long time after. Eighth story. 14 years old, walking home, it was dark. A man gets off the bus, opens up his coat and says, "Like what you see?" He was in his 40s, completely naked. I have never run so fast in my life. Ninth story. I was once threatened by a man with a scoped rifle while walking my dog. I was out in a field behind my apartment building at night, and I heard a voice from behind me say, "You better run fast, boy." I turned and saw a backlight silhouette of a man on a balcony with a scoped rifle, and I heard him close the bolt. I decided that running would only add tension to the situation, so I yanked on my dog's leash while calmly yet quickly walking towards the closest cover I could find. I immediately called 911, and when it was all said and done, the guy with the rifle claimed he was just showing the rifle to his friend. Bullshit, but I could not prove otherwise. 10th story. I pulled over to help a lady with a flat tire one night in West Texas. While talking to her and showing her how to change the tire, I heard a sneeze come from the dark bushes off the shoulder. Out of habit, I said, "Bless you," and heard a "thanks" come back from the magical talking bush. I shot her a confused look, and she face-palmed and sheepishly explained that the man in the bush was her husband, and he did not want to scare me off to help with the tire. I asked why he did not change it, and she let it slip that he was wanted by United States Marshals. I finished up, and she offered me $100 to keep quiet. I figured $100 for me to forget was a good deal, so I accepted and left. 15 minutes down the road, 6 Texas troopers went flying by the other way. Hope they do not think I snitched. 11th story. I work in an adult store, typically alone. When I was about 2 months in, this guy comes in, and right away I noticed something was off about this guy. He started asking me to help him find pornography, which we are not allowed to do for safety reasons, as most of our DVD section has no camera coverage and management at the time forbade us from going back there with customers. I refused to help this guy find his jerk-off material, and he goes, "What? It is not like I am going to rape you." He walks away and then comes back up to me less than a minute later, asking for help with a product this time. I go over and tell him about this product. Out of nowhere, he asked me how much I weigh. I said, "Oh, I am not sure, probably 210 to 220. He goes, "No way, I do not believe you," and he wraps his arms around me way too tightly and lifts me up off the ground. I had to literally beg this guy to put me down, and he did not until I said, "Please, I have a bad back problem." I was beside myself and fully panicking, so I beelined it for the counter and waited for him to leave a few minutes later. I called my manager in tears. I was a mess. I've only seen him twice since then, and I kicked him out for stealing. 12th story. Back when I was 16 working at Lowe's, some customer who was an old man walked up behind me without me even noticing and whispered in my ear, "Do you know where I can find the hoses at?" He said that so close to my ear where I could feel his warm breath while he was caressing my shoulder. My body froze up and all I could say was, "I think they are in aisle 5. Well, shortly after I found out that he never even went to that end of the store where they were. Lul. 13th story. Some guy started yelling at me on a bus in Greek one time when I would not make conversation with him, calling me a whore and presumably a bunch of other rude things. When I tried to pass him to go to another seat, he kicked me in the back. He was not drunk or high as far as I could tell. Some people are just psychopaths. 14th story. I am 14 and was all alone in a dirt path in India, and some guy was just sitting on a rock in the middle of the forest. I did not make eye contact, but I could see he was crying. I wanted to help, but my gut told me not to. 3 days later, he was caught for murdering his wife and 5-year-old daughter. 15th story. An older woman approached me on campus, asking me to take her to this spot in town since she does not know where it is. I say no, it was a new city for me too, and she gave vibes. She insists it is right around the corner, so it is not that far, so suddenly she knows where it is. I refuse, and she hesitates and then walks off. An older guy asks if she needs directions only for her to walk by him. I just thought it was strange, but I did not really think about it. The next week, I check my phone when I get to class, and someone posted an article about how this older woman, who was tied to multiple cases of human trafficking, was just caught by the police in a nearby town. From the description alone, I knew it was the woman I had talked to. 16th story. I was once driving in the country, and it was pouring rain in the dead of night, so hard that I was driving very slowly and could not see any of the signs before GPS. I mean, I had never been in rain this heavy. I had to pull over to the side of the road to try and see the sign to see if I was going in the right direction. I did not get out due to the rain, so I was craning my neck forward to try and make out where I was, when suddenly the passenger door opened and a man got inside the car, sat down and looked at me. Here is South Africa. There is a fair amount of violent crime and hijackings, so I instinctively started panicking and yelling and screaming at the top of my lungs, flailing my arms to try and do something, anything to stop this guy from attacking me. He started screaming as well in terror and jumped out of the car. I quickly leaned over and closed the passenger door and sped off down the road. I was breathing so heavily at this point and trying my best to calm down, nearly in tears. I kept replaying it in my head the whole time and suddenly remembered that the man smiled at me. It suddenly dawned on me that it was probably a hitchhiker that I had not seen, who thought that I was pulling over to give him a lift, only to be greeted by me screaming and trying to hit him. It was probably his scariest encounter with a stranger as well. 17th story. Years ago, I used to work as an ecological surveyor. Basically, I got paid to take long walks in the Peak District National Park here in the United Kingdom and note down all the plant species I saw. I was walking down a trail one morning along the edge of a woodland when suddenly about 8 of the bushes stood up and produced rifles. I nearly shit myself and they were laughing like hell. It was a bunch of British Army guys on a camouflage and concealment exercise, and they had been following me to practice. Apparently, I had nearly trodden on one of them earlier as he was hiding right by the trail. We all ended up sitting around talking about football for a bit. Nice bunch of guys, but very scary indeed. 18th story. When I was about 6 years old, I was with my family at an incredibly crowded street festival we would go to every year. I remember we had stopped to watch a band play for 1 minute or two, and then my mother, I assumed, took my hand and we continued walking. After a few seconds, I realized the hand I was holding was puffy and hot, and my mother's hands were always cool and more slender, so I knew it was not her hand I was holding. I looked up to see a woman with long blonde hair and sunglasses grinning down at me. I said, "You are not my mother," and she just laughed and said, "That is okay, you can come with me anyway." Obviously, my mother and father had realized I was not with them at this point and were freaking out. My father just happened to look in the exact right direction at the right time and saw this lady leading me away through a break in the crowd. He ran over to us, grabbed her shoulder, and she dropped my hand and disappeared in the crowd. I still cannot believe he spotted us. It was like shoulder-to-shoulder people at this event. 19th story. I dropped my son off at school one morning and then went to the grocery store with my infant daughter. It was so early, there were only 1 or 2 other customers. There was an older man with a walker that I did not really pay too much attention to who kept popping up in the same aisle as us. I got out to my car and put my groceries in, and then I was putting my daughter in her car seat when the man came up behind me. He asked me a question, and when I turned to answer, he shoved his walker into the back of my legs, pinning me against my car inside the open door. I tried moving around but could not go anywhere except forward, and he started pushing me down to the floor of my car. I was so scared that once he had me down there, he was going to go for my daughter. So I threw myself over her so my whole upper body was in her car seat and wedged myself in tight, trying to cover as much of her as possible. He grabbed me by the hair and was trying to pull me up when someone started honking their car horn. Another mother had been sitting in her car with her own baby asleep and had seen what was happening. Another car pulled up behind mine, and the man ran over and got in quickly, obviously never needing the walker. The police were called, but the plates on the car that he left in were stolen, so as far as I know, he was never found. 20th story. While working a late shift at a restaurant at 16 years old, I had a customer who just would not leave. He was approximately 50 years old and just stared at me the entire time he ate his food, which was approximately 2 hours for some reason. When he came up to pay, he was super weird about it. Like I would say, okay, here's your price. And he would pause and say, do I get a discount or something? And I said, no, will you be paying with cash or card? And he said something like, cash. And I was like, okay. And then he just stared at me while I waited for him to hand me his cash. After approximately 2 minutes of this weird interaction, he had his change, the bill, and he could leave. So I said, have a good night. And he said, can I go now? And I said, yes. And he said something like, am I pestering you? Why do not I take you home and pester you there? So I just thought, nope, and walked right back to the back room where I got my coworker to deal with him. Apparently, she scolded him and said it was shameful he would say that to a minor. And he said, well then, can I take you home? What a fucking creep. 21st story. When I was around 10 to 11, a friend invited me to a water park. During swimming at a wave pool, he found some random kid around our age and decided to tell this kid that the game we were going to play was hold me down in the water. I did not get that memo, so I thought he and this kid were just trying to drown me. This went on for what felt like an hour of me swimming away and hiding. I did not hang out with him afterward. Same trip, after we were done with the pool, I got to the changing rooms and there are a couple of people in there. An old man on the bench asks me if I wanted him to help me change. I just said, no, thank you, and quickly changed and ran out. 22nd story. I was in Paris, in the train station that takes you to the airport. My flight was very early in the morning, so I planned to stay in the station until 5 o'clock in the morning or so, and then go to the airport. This dude started talking to me very friendly. He praised my French and all that. He asked me where I was from, and I was totally lying, because who the hell gives a stranger his information? He asked me if I am going to the airport, and I said yes, tomorrow early in the morning. At some point, I realized another guy was kind of circling us. They were from the same ethnicity. For some reason, this gave me a bad vibe. I was kind of far away from the other people because I was using a machine to buy tickets, and several of them were not working. I started walking towards the entry where more people were seated, and he is still trying to talk with me. The other guy is still following us, and then he says, do you know that the station closes in like 15 minutes? No. I was not able to hide my surprise. He told me they did not close before, but due to the amount of vagrants, they do now. He tries to touch my arm, and I asked, what the fuck are you doing? He said, you do not want to spend the night here. It is a dangerous neighborhood. And a pretty lady like you, one can only imagine what is going to happen to you. He offered to go to a hotel room with him. I was looking at the reflection of the glass wall and realized the other dude was getting closer to us. And at that moment, I thought I was going to be abducted. I was very nervous. Until I hear a Latin woman speaking Spanish, I looked at her, and she was with her 2 adult children. I almost cried. She was Mexican, and for some reason I was convinced she was going to help me. I said, I do not think my mother is going to like that. And I walked towards her and said very fast and low in Spanish, that guy and his friend are harassing me. Please help me. She did, and we stayed together the rest of the night until the train station opened again. I am forever grateful to her and her family. They saved me. I was able to return home to my real mother thanks to her. 23rd story. I will never forget it. When Ghostbusters 2 came out, I wanted to see it. My mother took me to the local theater. I think I was around 9 years old. I needed to use the bathroom, so I ran down the small hall and turned the corner. When I saw a much older man come out of the bathroom, and he stopped when he saw me and went back in. When I did not move, he opened the door, peeking his head and arm out, motioning me to come towards him. I probably looked like a deer in headlights. I did not move. I was frozen until he said, come on in. Panic rushed over me, and I ran back towards my mother, who said I was pale white. She quickly left the theater with me and went home. Stranger danger worked out that day in the 80s. I can still picture him, or at least the picture my brain made of this memory. 24th story. My mother was a lifelong drug abuser, but in the early days, she merely had a habit. As time went on, she became more unscrupulous, stealing from dealers and such. One day, my mother asked me to give her a ride to a friend's house. This should have set off red flags for me, but for some reason did not. And sure enough, as soon as we arrived, the dealer came outside and yelled at her, but promptly brandished a gun and pointed it at me. I figured from context clues that if he could not stop her directly, maybe he could hit her where it hurts by killing her son. 25th story. I was probably 16, sitting at home alone on the computer, when I looked up and saw a man on my back patio, looking at the windows and heading towards the door. I have no idea what came over my stupid teenage girl mind, but I opened the door and firmly told him to leave. It felt like the voice that came out of me was not mine. It was guttural and deep and grounded, which was the opposite of how I felt. He looked at me and did not move. He was not shocked. It was sort of like he was trying to challenge me or scare me by holding his ground. I said, "Leave," one more time with the same voice, and he backed up. He said, "I was just looking for paint." And I responded, "I know. I am about to start looking for my father's gun." My divorced father did not live with us, nor was there a gun in the house, lol. I slammed the door, locked it, and went to call 911. They found the guy breaking into another house down the street. Thank God. I got to go pick him out of a lineup and everything. Still one of my scariest moments and possibly one of the stupidest moments in my life. 26th story. I was traveling home to California and I was in Nevada. It was an emergency, so I had packed and left at around midnight. It was about 5:30 in the morning or so in rural Nevada. I was at a stop on my usual route. I was very familiar with the particular stop, and it was just an hour or so before the California border. Being a lone female, I concealed carry. I have my extended permit, which allowed concealed carry through several states, except California. And I was at my truck at an empty spot, and I was in the cab disassembling and putting away my gun to be in compliance. I stepped out to go to the restroom, and someone had managed to get close to my truck and was hiding along the passenger side, and I did not know it until I had walked past them. Whoever it was grabbed me from behind. I let out the loudest, most blood-curdling scream. Winning scream, but there were no other people at this stop. I fought and tried to buck the guy off of me, but I was not doing very well. Kicking led him to lift me off the ground where I could not get him, and trying to break through his arms made him bend me over with him still behind me. I am not sure how long I was screaming and fighting, but then I heard tires screech, and I figured it was the creepy van my parents told me to avoid as a kid coming to take me away. No, it was a Toyota Corolla full of local teenagers headed to the gas station before school. The teenagers jumped out and ran toward us, and the driver stayed in the vehicle. The guy who grabbed me took off. Two of the children chased him through the desert beyond the gas station on foot, and the driver and the other child made sure I was all right. I send these 4 boys Christmas and birthday cards every year. I am sure if it was not for them, I would have been kidnapped or killed. Josh, Austin, Mason, and James, thank you guys. 27th story. It is a mix of the scariest and the best. I was 11 years old and at the park with my cousin who was 3 years old. My cousin, being a stubborn 3-year-old, told me to leave him be, and I sat out on the bench. I was just reading my book and occasionally looking up until this man who appeared to be 50-something years old sat down next to me and just started talking. He asked me which child was mine, like 4 times, even after I made it quite clear I was uncomfortable. And then he got all close to me and was like, "Do you want another one?" So I started freaking out until this homeless man, who I later knew to be Marty, pulled me off the bench and told him that he was lucky he did not pop his jaw and told me to go home. I am glad Marty showed up because I do not know what I would have done. 28th story. I was 21 years old and female at the time when I was in a store picking up some items for my house, when I noticed a man was literally peeking at me from around a corner. I first brushed it off and continued my shopping, but was aware that this man was following me around the store. He then sang out to me and said I looked familiar, and asked if I went to the local university. I did not, so I said no. At this point, I became creeped out, so I checked out and went to my car. I heard footsteps behind me and knew he had followed me, so I just jumped in my car and locked the doors. It was dark, so I had not noticed him go around the back of my car until he banged on my passenger window. I ignored him and started the car. This prompted him to run around the front and start banging on my driver's side door, trying to open it and asking me for a ride. I was terrified and just pulled out of the parking space as fast as I could and drove off, with him chasing my car until I rounded a corner. I have no idea what his plan was, but to this day I am nervous about dark parking lots at night. 29th story. I was in high school and worked at a truck stop. One night a trucker came in and stared at me for a long time. Wherever I moved to, he was staring me down. I told him that if he needed anything, that he would need to come to the counter and order it. He just grunted and kept staring. I am not a small person, and at that time I was in football, wrestling, and track. I was also at the gym 6 days a week. I weighed 190 pounds of muscle and teenager hormones. But the vibes I was getting from this guy were making me nervous. I called up my other coworker and told them I was going to be in the freezer for a while. So I was stocking the freezers and coolers for a while and then went to the bathroom. As I entered the bathroom, the trucker jumped up and walked in behind me and just stood in there while I took a piss and washed my hands. As soon as I got out, I grabbed the trash bags and beelined outside to take care of the trash at the pumps until he left. My co-worker asked me why the trucker kept following me after I finally came in. I had no idea why. He never said anything, did not order anything, just filled up his semi and creeped on me. I have never been as creeped out by a person as I was with that guy. 30th story. A very cheerful guy approached me and my friend in a park in a very non-threatening way. He was holding a frisbee and explained he was putting together an impromptu game of ultimate frisbee and looking for people to join him, which was fine, but then he tried to grab me by the throat. It was such a sudden change of mood. My friend, an athletic dude, fortunately, got between us and just stared him down and he ran away. The whole thing was just bizarre. 31st story. My siblings and I were walking across the road to a gas station. We frequently went there to grab snacks and such, and then we would leave and go for a walk down a road behind it. Well, a car started following us with its headlights off, so I quickly dipped and telling my siblings to follow me. So we started running through a field and lay on the ground to wait for them to leave. Well, they drove down the road and then circled back. This happened about 4 to 5 times before they gave up, and we went home. 32nd story. I was 19 and I was sleeping with the window open since it was a hot summer night. My boyfriend and I were both knocked out, but all of a sudden I woke up, just opened my eyes, did not get up, and I had a horrible gut feeling and just an overwhelming feeling that I was being watched. I turned to my side and I saw someone's head sticking in from the window. Needless to say, I had a heart attack, and as soon as they heard me get up, they left. 33rd story. When my daughter turned 1 year old, we went on a trip to Hawaii. When we were first sitting in the airport waiting to check in for our tickets, a man approached me and started commenting on how beautiful my daughter was. Fine, thanks, but it did not stop there. He stood over me and continued to try and touch her and ask about her age, birthday, favorite things, where we were going, and so on. I refused to answer, but he refused to move, and we were trapped. My husband came back and the man stepped away pretty quickly. I told airport security, but they did not do anything. We got to our gate, and a few minutes later, the same man sat and positioned himself where he could watch our daughter. If we moved seats, he kept her in his sight. I mentioned it to the gate agent, who brushed it off again. We got on the plane, and he managed to also be on the plane in a seat where he could keep an eye on her. He kept smiling at her and getting up to walk the aisles and pass her. My husband got up, and he came and said in baby talk, "I found out where you are going, did I not?" I reported it to the flight attendant, who was not messing around. He was forced to switch seats and was not allowed to get up again. Upon landing, there were people waiting for him that he was forced to go with. Security or airport staff, I do not know, but we did not see him again. I am 100% certain our daughter would have been kidnapped or trafficked if we had not been on high alert and reported him. That was 2 years ago, and I still remember how terrified I was. 34th story. I was kidnapped and robbed back in 2016 when I was 23. I was stopping at the gang station on my way home from work one night, and a couple that appeared to be under the influence of methamphetamine was hanging out. They asked me for a ride to a motel 10 or so miles down the highway and then pulled a gun on me when I refused. After riding along with guns pointed at me, they started smoking a blunt and got hungry. I spent $60 of my money at Taco Bell, where I ran out of the car and into said Taco Bell. They had taken my phone, wallet, and everything I had, basically. So I ran in and used the store phone to call the police while the Taco Bell employees kept them in the drive-thru, waiting on fresh beef. Thankfully, the individual stayed there, and the police had every exit blocked within a couple of minutes. I got my car, money, and so on back the next day, and they are currently serving 50 years for kidnapping and second-degree armed robbery, and they will not have a shot at parole for another 20 years. I got really lucky that everything turned out the way it did. 35th story. I was walking home from the bus stop after school. About 15 years old, man. It was really not far, but there were construction workers drinking on the side of the road. One of them got up and followed me home, calling suggestive things. I honestly cannot remember what, but his intentions were clear. This was about 200 meters from home, so I sprinted home. We have an automatic gate, so I realized he would catch me if I waited for it to open or he would follow me in. So I climbed over, which is normally not easy, but that day I flew over. I was really shaken up. For me, this story is actually about what happened next, which is that I called my mother, who had an intense job. She dropped everything at work, came home immediately, made me hot chocolate and pancakes. We had a long conversation where she validated my feelings and fear. She is the best. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Write in the comments under the video what was your scariest encounter with a stranger. And also be sure to subscribe to our channel to not miss new super interesting videos. And I advise you to watch our other videos.